Hello friends and welcome to my channel. In this video we'll be learning about the functional areas of the cerebrum. In the last video we had learnt about the cerebral sulci and gyri, and in this video we'll be focusing on the functional areas. Now what are functional areas? The cerebral cortex is divided into a number of areas by many neurobiologists. Now one of them, named Brodmann, divided the cerebral cortex into 52 such areas with specific functions. Now in this video, we'll be looking at each of these functional areas and its specific functions in detail. Now before we learn about the lobes of the cerebrum and the functional areas in each of the lobes, let's look at the basic divisions of these functional areas. First is the motor area, which is responsible for the voluntary activities that are carried out. Then comes the sensory area, which collects information, that is the information from the sensory organs, and the receptors are carried to the sensory area of the brain. And association area is nothing but it integrates the activities of the motor and sensory area. And there are some regions where the motor area is more predominant, that is called the motor sensory area, and in some areas the sensory area is more predominant, so it is called the sensory motor area. The motor area is involved in planning, control and execution of voluntary movements. Sensory area is involved in processing the sensory information from various parts of the body, and association area integrate and analyze the responses of motor and sensory areas. Before moving on, let's concise the important points that we learned till now. There are three basic functional divisions of the cerebral cortex: the motor areas, the sensory areas, and the association areas. The motor areas is involved in planning, control, and execution of voluntary movements. This area gives origin to the corticospinal and corticonuclear fibers. Now, the sensory areas are involved in processing the sensory information from the various parts of our body. And association areas integrate and analyze responses of these motor and sensory areas. Direct sensory or motor responses are not elicited or produced by these association areas. Now, the motor and sensory function also overlap in some areas of the cortex. If the motor function is predominant, that area is known as the motor sensory area. If sensory function is predominant, it is known as the sensory motor area. Now we'll be learning about the functional areas in each of the lobes one by one. So here you can see that this is the anterior end, this is the posterior end, this is the superolateral surface that we are seeing in this diagram right now. This area is the frontal lobe. Here is the parietal lobe, this is the occipital lobe, and this is the temporal lobe. So firstly, we'll be learning about the functional areas of the frontal lobe. So before learning it in detail, we need to know the area numbers as well as its names. Beginning with area number 4, this is called the motor area, and its location is in the precentral gyrus. This is the central sulcus, this is the precentral sulcus, and this is the precentral gyrus. So here is the motor area, area number 4. Next we have area number 6, which is called the premotor area. Its location is in the posterior parts of the superior, middle and inferior frontal gyrus. Now in my earlier video of the cerebrum, I had explained the sulci and gyri in detail, where I had explained that this is the superior frontal gyrus, this is the middle frontal gyrus, and this is the inferior frontal gyrus. And area number 6 lies in the posterior aspect of these areas, right here. So we learned about the motor area, the premotor area. Next is the frontal eye field right here. Its area number is 8. And its location is in the posterior part of the middle frontal gyrus, right here. Next we have area number 44 and 45, which is known as motor speech area of Broca. Now this area is important. It lies in the pars triangularis and pars opercularis. Finally, we have area numbers 9, 10, 11 and 12. They are known as the prefrontal area, and it lies in the large anterior part of the frontal lobe. So we've learned about area number 4, that is the motor area number 6, premotor area, the frontal eye field, that is area number 8, 44 and 45, that is motor speech area of Broca, and 9, 10, 11 and 12, which is the prefrontal area. Now we'll be learning about each of these areas in detail. So now we'll be learning about area number 4, that is a motor area, also called the primary motor area, in detail. Its location is in the precentral gyrus and the anterior part of the paracentral lobule. Now we have learned about the paracentral lobule in the medial surface. So I'll be showing you another diagram to show that area. Here you can see this diagram shows the medial surface of the cerebrum. This is the anterior aspect, this is the posterior aspect, and here is the paracentral lobule. And this is the anterior part of the paracentral lobule. Here you can see area number 4. Now the function of this primary motor area is contraction of muscles of the contralateral side of the body, that is the opposite side of the body, and ipsilateral control of the muscles of the head and axial muscles of the body. Now I'll explain you what I told you right now. This is the right cerebral hemisphere and this is the right primary motor area. So this will be controlling the contraction of the muscles of the left side of the body, as well as it will be controlling the muscles of the head and axial muscles of the body on the right side itself, that is the ipsilateral side itself. Next we have to learn about the representation of the body on the primary motor area. Now this diagram is nothing but if we take the right cerebral hemisphere that you see right here and cut it into a coronal section, that is what we see right here. This is the medial surface and this is the superolateral surface. Now the representation of the body on this primary motor area is upside down. In order to understand this, just imagine a person who is sitting right here with his legs hanging down the medial surface. And if we ask the person to lie down, his head will be on the most ventral aspect or the most lower aspect of the precentral gyrus. So his tongue will be here, larynx, then comes the face, then the hand, body and trunk, and finally the paracentral lobule on the medial side will be controlling the leg and the foot. Before moving on to the premotor area, let's concise the points that we learnt under the primary motor area. Its location is in the precentral gyrus and the anterior part of the paracentral lobule on the medial surface. Its function is contraction of muscles on the opposite side of the body, ipsilateral control of the muscles of the head and axial muscles of the body. Two additional points are execution of movements and it helps in the maintenance of simple movements. Now what is the representation of the body? Representation is upside down except the face. The pharyngeal region and the tongue is in the ventral region of the postcentral gyrus, that is the most lower part of the postcentral gyrus. It is followed by the face, the hand, arm, trunk and thigh, and the remainder of the leg, foot, perineum is on the medial surface in the paracentral lobule. Now the size of the cortical area, it depends on the functional importance and the need for sensitivity, that is face, larynx and lips. They have a large cortical area, and hand, thumb and index finger also have a large cortical area on the primary motor area of the cerebrum. Next let's move on to area number 6, that is the premotor area. Its location is anterior to the motor area in the superolateral as well as the medial surface of the cerebral hemisphere. It lies posterior to the superior, middle and inferior frontal gyrus right here. Now what are its functions? It programs skilled motor activity. It directs the primary motor area in its execution, and the primary motor area and premotor area together is known as the primary somatomotor area. It gives origin to corticospinal and corticonuclear fibers, and it also receives fibers from the cerebellum. So mainly the premotor area is concerned with directing the primary motor area in execution of the movement. Concising the points under the premotor area, its location is anterior to the motor area in the superolateral and medial surface of the hemisphere. Its function is it programs skill motor activity. It directs the primary motor area in its execution. Premotor and primary motor area together is known as the primary somatomotor area. It gives origin to corticospinal and corticonuclear fibers, and it receives fibers from the cerebellum. Next, let's learn about the frontal eye field. Its location is anterior to the precentral gyrus and posterior to the middle frontal gyrus right here. The lower part of area 8 of Brodmann on the lateral surface of the cerebral hemisphere. Now what are its functions? It helps in the conjugate movement of the eyes. Now what is conjugate movement? Deviation of both eyes to the opposite side is known as the conjugate movements. And movements of the head and dilatation of the pupil may also occur. And this area is connected to the cortex of the occipital lobe, which is concerned with vision. Concising the important points under the frontal eye field, its location is in the middle frontal gyrus, just anterior to the precentral gyrus. It occupies the lower part of area 8 of the Brodmann on the lateral surface of the cerebral hemisphere. Its function is conjugate movement of eyes, that is deviation of both eyes to the opposite side. Like when we look at the left, both our eyes together move to the left side, and when we look at the right, both our eyes together move to the right side. So that is called the conjugate movement of the eyes. And movement of the head and dilatation of the pupil may also occur, and this area is connected to the cortex of the occipital lobe, which is concerned with vision. Next, let's learn about the motor speech area of Broca, that is area number 44 and 45. It is located in the middle opercular and triangular portions of the inferior frontal gyrus, that is pars opercularis and pars triangularis. It occupies areas 44 and 45 of Brodmann, and it is present on the left hemisphere in 98% of right-handed persons. For example, if you are a right-handed person, your Broca speech area will be present on the left hemisphere. Finally, let's look at the prefrontal cortex, that is areas 9, 10, 11 and 12. Its location is it lies anterior to the precentral area right here. It includes the superior, middle and inferior frontal gyrus, the orbital gyri and anterior half of the cingulate gyrus that you can see in the medial surface, and it occupies 9, 10, 11 and 12 of the Brodmann's area. Now this area is connected to other areas of the cerebral cortex, the corpus striatum, thalamus and also hypothalamus. It is also connected to the cerebellum through the pontine nuclei. Now what are its functions? It controls the emotions, concentration, attention, initiative and judgment. Now there is an area in the medial surface of the cerebrum called the supplementary motor area or the motor sensory area number 2 that lies in functional area number 6 right here, anterior to the paracentral lobule. Now its function is that it produces bilateral movements. Concising the important points under the motor speech area of Broca and the prefrontal cortex, the motor speech area of Broca lies in the middle opercular and triangular portions of the inferior frontal gyrus, that's the pars opercularis and pars triangularis. It occupies the areas 44 and 45 of Brodmann. It is present on the left side in 98% of right-handed people. Now the prefrontal cortex lies anterior to the precentral area. It includes the superior, middle and inferior frontal gyrus, the orbital gyri and the anterior half of the cingulate gyrus, and the Brodmann's areas 9, 10, 11 and 12. This area is connected to other areas of the cerebral cortex, the corpus striatum, thalamus and hypothalamus. It is also connected to the cerebellum through the pontine nuclei. Its function is that it controls emotions, concentration, attentions, initiative and judgment. Now I have included the functional areas of the frontal lobe in a tabular column so it becomes easier to learn it. That is the area number, the area, the location, its functions and effect of lesion. Now after having completed the functional areas of the frontal lobe, let's move on to the functional areas of the parietal lobe. If you have noticed, the frontal lobe is more concerned with the motor functions as we learned about the motor area and the premotor area. In the parietal lobe, we are going to deal with more of the sensory functional areas. So here we have the first somesthetic area that has area numbers 1, 2 and 3. Then comes the second somesthetic area that you see right here, and then we have the somesthetic association cortex that is area number 5 and 7. So we have the first somesthetic area, the second somesthetic area and the somesthetic association cortex. So let's look at each of it in detail. First we have the first somesthetic area. It is also known as the general sensory area or the first somatosensory area, that is SM1. It occupies the post-central gyrus. We know that this is the central sulcus, this is the post-central sulcus and this green area is the post-central gyrus. And it also occupies a part of the paracentral lobule in the medial surface of the cerebrum. Now what is its function? It is responsible for the perception of exteroceptive sensations, that is touch, pain and temperature, and also proprioceptive sensations, that is joint position sense. Next we have the second somesthetic area, which is also known as the second somatosensory area. It is located in the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus and it corresponds to area 40 and 43. Now its function is to activate in response to light, touch, pain and visceral sensations. Then comes the somesthetic association cortex, that is area number 5 and 7. It is located in the superior parietal lobule as well as the precuneus on the medial surface. Now its functions is that it regulates stereognosis and sensory speech. Now what is stereognosis? If you are given an object in your hand with your eyes closed and there are no auditory sensations, and if you recognize the object in your hand, that ability is called stereognosis. So this area is associated with it. Now let's concise the important points that we learned under the functional areas of the parietal lobe. We have the first somesthetic area, which is also called the first somatosensory area. It occupies the post-central gyrus and posterior part of the paracentral lobule. Its function is perception of exteroceptive sensation, that is touch, pain, temperature, and proprioceptive sensation. Now the second somesthetic area, which is also called the second somatosensory area, is located in the superior lip of the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus. And its function is it activates in response to touch, pain and visceral sensation. Then we have the somesthetic association cortex. Its location is in the superior parietal lobule on the supralateral surface and the precuneus on the medial surface. It occupies areas 5 and 7 of Brodmann, and its function is stereognosis and sensory speech. Now I have made it into a tabular column to make it easier to remember the sensory areas and the sensory association areas, its location, function and effect of lesion. Now after having completed the functional areas of the frontal and parietal lobe, let's move on to the functional areas of the occipital lobe. Now it is mainly concerned with the special sensation of vision, and area number 17 is located above and below the calcarine sulcus that you see right here. This is the calcarine sulcus. This is area number 17. Now the visual area is also called striate area, and area 17 constitutes the first visual area. It is continuous both above and below with area number 18 and area number 19, as you can see right here. And this area number 18 and 19 are known as visual association areas or psychovisual areas. Now let's look at its functions. Area number 17, which is called the visuosensory area or the striate area, has a function which is reception and perception of isolated visual impressions of color, size, form and motion. Now what does this mean? When we look at an object, its color, the size of the object, its form, and if there is motion, the motion of the object is stored or it is perceived by this area, that is area number 17, as the other visual impressions of that particular object. Now moving on to areas 18 and 19, it is called the visuopsychic or the parastriate or peristriate areas. It surrounds the striate areas, that is it surrounds area number 17. Its function is correlation of visual impulses with past memory. That is, when we look at an object or if we look at a person and we remember or recognize a person, that is associated with this particular areas, that is area number 18 and 19. Now this is a supralateral view of the cerebrum, and this shows the occipital lobe with visual area 17, 18 and 19. They are connected or linked together by association fibers, and these visual areas gives efferent fibers which reach the frontal eye field right here. Concising the functional areas of the occipital lobe, we have area number 17, 18 and 19. 17 is known as visuosensory area. It is located in and around the postcalcarine sulcus. Its function is reception and perception of isolated visual impressions of color, size, form and motion. And there is the effect of lesion, which is homonymous hemianopia with macula sparing. Then we have 18 and 19, which is known as visuopsychic, parastriate or peristriate area. It surrounds the striate area and its function is correlation of visual impulses with past memory. Now we are moving on to the last lobe, that is the temporal lobe. It is mainly concerned with the special sensation of hearing, and there is an auditory area or the acoustic area, which is also called auditory sensory area. It corresponds to areas 41 and 42 of Brodmann, that you can see right here. Now what are its functions? It involves reception and perception of isolated auditory impressions of loudness, quality and pitch. That is, if you are hearing my voice right now, the loudness, quality and pitch, all of this are analyzed and perceived by this area of the cerebral cortex, that is the auditory area. Now there is another area known as the auditopsychic area, which is constituted with area number 22 of Brodmann right here, located in the superior temporal gyrus. Its function is auditory correlation of auditory impression with past memory and its identification. That means it's nothing but when you listen to a voice, you can recognize the voice of which person it is. So that function is correlated with this area, that is the auditopsychic area. Now we have an important area which is called the sensory speech area or the vernix area, which is also known as the sensory language area. It is located in the inferior part of the parietal lobule and it corresponds to area number 22. Now what is its function? It involves the language comprehension, that is the understanding of a particular language, its use, and the lesions to this area, that is lesions to this vernix area, may cause vernix aphasia. Concising the functional areas of the temporal lobe, we have area number 41 and 42, which is the auditosensory area. Its location is in the posterior part of the superior temporal gyrus and the anterior transverse temporal gyrus. Its function is reception and perception of isolated auditory impressions like loudness, quality, and pitch. And the effect of lesion is impaired hearing. Area number 22 is auditopsychic area, that is the location is rest of the superior temporal gyrus. Its function is correlation of auditory impulses with past memory and identification of the sounds heard. Effect is auditory agnosia. And finally we have area number 22, that is vernix area. It is actually located in the inferior part of the parietal lobule and its function is sensory speech. Effect of lesion is sensory aphasia. I hope you found this video helpful. To get the notes of functional areas of cerebrum as well as other notes of anatomy, physiology, biomechanics and other health science subjects, visit my website, the link to which is given in the description below. To get updates on my latest videos, click on the subscribe button. To get notifications, tap on the bell icon. Thank you for watching.